think there are two types of people that will enjoy this Chainsaw Man episode, very similar to the manga. On one hand, you have people that love and adore Chainsaw Man as a manga, but also Fujimoto's other works, and they appreciate it because of the style, the authenticity, the creativity that Fujimoto puts within his works. It's very identifiable. When translated over to an anime, it's not the CGI that people were expecting. It's not the 2D animation or the fluidity of everything, the beautiful, pretty colors. No, for me personally, and probably a lot of other fans, the expectation and the want was from how they would adapt Fujimoto's style, how they would perceive it and conceptualize it within their own way. And for me, this is the reason why I love the episode, why I think it's almost perfect. Not because it hits the high notes of 2D, 3D animation and the fluidity of it all, but how close it mimics Fujimoto's authenticity. On the other hand, there's probably a lot of you watching that have never experienced Fujimoto's story before, that have never experienced Chainsaw Man. So you're just watching it because it's the brand new anime, and that's perfectly okay, but the expectation that the community has given for this series is something spectacular, something almost unobtainable, because you're going into it and you're expecting most likely some of the best animation quality that you could absolutely imagine. No CGI whatsoever, just straight 2D animation with pure talent and artistry combined to create such a phenomenal viewing experience. Now, it's not wrong for you to perceive it that way, but the difference is that you didn't actually get that. You got some great flashy moments, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things that didn't live up to that expectation. So the episode for you may just be that it was good, that it was solid, that it was maybe even amazing. But for us, it might have been close to being perfect. It's because we value different things. And I think that's going to be a continued conversation a lot of people have for Chainsaw Man throughout the season. See, I believe any studio given the right amount of time and talent can create something spectacular animation-wise. But not every studio can convert the identity of a manga into an anime adaptation. So far, everyone that has worked on Chainsaw Man's anime is a massive fan of Fujimoto's works, how he writes his story, how he presents his characters, the themes, the symbolism, the emotional vulnerability that goes into everything. It's very specific. And they have done the research, the hard work to understand this as much as possible while creating something new and vibrant and refreshing within the anime adaptation. It's not identical. It's not one-to-one because that'd be extremely difficult to do and may not even work. But what they have created and finalized is something very close, and it's endlessly impressive. The first biggest taste that you can get from this, how they're trying to pay so much respect and homage to Fujimoto's authenticity, is literally within the opening. You'll watch it and think this makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a collaboration of all the main characters playing around with each other, but you'll notice that pretty much all of it is references to movies and pop culture based around iconic characters and scenes. This is because Fujimoto absolutely adores movies, and he uses a lot of movie references within his manga. So they went above and beyond just to create this nonsensical opening that is super entertaining and super fulfilling, and a lot of people aren't going to understand it, but for Chainsaw Man fans, for Fujimoto fans, this is a love letter to him from the talented, hardworking staff, and they nailed it out the park. It is a perfect opening that I believe embodies Chainsaw Man's identity and Fujimoto's identity with all of his works. On top of that, the ending is very interesting. So far, it seems like it's going to just be a kind of showcase reel of maybe what happened within the episode or different clips from here and there, right? But every song is going to be entirely different every single episode. So already just with the opening and the ending, they are going all in just to show how much they appreciate the source material, how much they appreciate what they're working on. As much as this is a business, this is also a passion project for them, and you can see it bleed through all of this creativity that they're doing. The anime for me personally is brilliant. I don't think it's peak or the most perfect thing to ever exist, and I don't think it's going to live up to the astronomically high expectations that the community has unfortunately set. For us, however, we're probably all enjoying it, but again, for newcomers, you're probably a little bit confused. They have definitely changed a lot of things to fit their vision a bit easier. They've made the story more grounded, more quote-unquote realistic, more gritty. You can tell this with the color palette being used, or even just the audio or the OST or the music, how characters linger for a lot more. And this is just a creative difference between manga and anime and how that kind of weave between each other. Obviously, when you're reading a manga, if there's not really much dialogue, you can blitz through it unexpectedly. Sure, you can look at the artwork, but for the most part, you're not going to be able to linger onto those moments for very long. And authors usually notice this. In anime, however, you can draw out a scene without dialogue for a very long time. And this is exactly what the first episode does. And it creates this sense of claustrophobia, this sense of anxiety and dread and grimace throughout the whole runtime. Tonally, it is impressive because it's consistent, it's thick, and the way they amplify this extremely well that I was impressed with is this droning music that they have very slightly within the background for specific moments. When they start to ramp it up, you'll hear this distorted violin or piano or some sort of instrument that is just droning and ear-piercing, and it does so much to amplify the scene tenfold. It puts you within the moment and makes it feel inescapable. It makes you feel boxed in, and it's I think a great representation of Denji specifically with what he goes through, what he has been through, the difficulties of his life, and how much that's going to change and evolve over time. It also just does a great job in showing the brutality of the world. It's not kind to Denji, it's not kind to children, and the devils just add a whole new layer on top of it. When you think about it like that, for a series that's based around the brutality and horrors of devils, it's ironic that the most disgusting individuals is that of humans. And for newcomers, you'll probably notice that being a recurring theme. Trust me, there's probably a lot of things that you'll miss, which later on down the season, you'll come back to the first episode and it will make a lot more sense. Why Denji acts the way he does, why he thinks about the things that he does. The story never paints itself as being too serious, so the anime is actually opening up that door a lot easier for you to pay attention to these things. The manga never really gave it to you in that much detail, to that much extent, so you could easily just accidentally bypass it, but now you're forced in and you're focused. This leads us to animation. 2D, 3D, the marrying of both. Is it good? Is it bad? What's the go? I think the 2D animation is great. I think it suits the simplicity of what Chainsaw Man is. It isn't crazily over the top, and when you see the devil characteristics and how they function within the world, it makes sense. It works really well. The CGI is also really well conceptualized, but there is portions where it feels lacking, or it feels off, or it feels kind of oddly placed within there. I think this goes into a much bigger conversation that I'm not all too well versed in when it comes to CGI and business and the usage or reasoning behind its usage when you have so much talent on a team. From my very small pool of knowledge when it comes to this type of business, CGI is usually only used because there's not enough time, because the animation industry is very grueling, it's very taxing, it's very unhealthy, and the level of expectation is only growing higher and higher. So to bypass a lot of the struggles and difficulties because studios or corporations won't allow that flexibility for talent to thrive, they have to make things work as best as possible, and CGI comes into play. With that knowledge in mind, I think they've done a phenomenal job in merging both 2D animation and 3D animation to the point where it just looks beautiful, where it looks crisp, it looks stunning, and I can easily imagine that there's going to be specific episodes where that attention to detail is 10 times better than what you've probably seen, and potentially 10 times worse than what you've seen. Unfortunately, it is a harsh reality of the business, and it squanders the vision and talent of everyone that's so passionately working on this project. I'm sure if they could, they would probably want to spend more time on it to really finalize everything the way that they really envisioned it. Just to pull it apart even further, that one extra step, imagine animating the teeth of the chainsaw at such high speed from so many different angles, frame by frame. Do you know how difficult that sounds? I'm not even an animator. I'm not someone that is very savvy when it comes to the artistic process of all of this stuff. But for me, just cropping out a photo of Chainsaw Man with the teeth on the chainsaw is time consuming. So imagine drawing that and visualizing that and making it work cohesively for so many said seconds or minutes within motion, within fluidity, with all this other stuff going on within a time crunch. That sounds like one of the most stressful things that you could do. So I would say with what they have managed to accomplish, it is spectacular. It looks great, it feels great, it works when it's on its lowest part, and it's never too distracting. There may be points where you think is a little bit off, but it's very sporadic. It's not a massive portion, it may just be a singular second or three, and then you move on to something more entertaining. Going back to what I said at the beginning of the video, what's impressive is not the 2D or 3D animation. That was not where my expectation was. My expectation was how they would try to mimic and match Fujimoto's identity, and I think they have done a very good job doing so. This is an author that writes very chaotically, very purposefully, very contextually, symbolically, and feels a lot of things very simplistically on the surface, but underneath they start to explode and explore down so many different avenues, and he allows readers to explore those avenues as much as possible. And this is a pretty standard thing for a lot of literature and a lot of works in general, but Fujimoto does it his way, in a way that is obstructing and sometimes confusing and very all over the place, so much so that you can read Chainsaw Man's manga and miss basically everything that sits underneath it, the actual story, the actual body of these characters, and that isn't even inherently wrong. So for me, they've raised this up a little bit more to make it more acknowledgeable, to make it easier to see and digest and to understand, and I think it will go a long way in the full term of this 12 episode season. In conclusion, I enjoyed this episode wholeheartedly. Personally, I think it was almost perfect. I think it took some odd steps here and there, but I think that's to be expected with any anime at this point. I for one am just happy to see Fujimoto get the recognition that I feel he deserves. Obviously he's blown up in recent years, but now this is going to take it to a whole new level. But what I think a lot of people may not actually mention is that this style that you see for Chainsaw Man, right, works with pretty much every single manga that Fujimoto has done. And if you didn't know, MAPPA wants to animate those too. That's Fire Punch, that's Goodbye Eri, that's Look Back, and even Chainsaw Man Part 2. To add on top of that, there's always been loose elements that all of Fujimoto's work take place within the same universe, loosely, quote unquote. What better way to pay homage to that idea than to have almost identical animation style and authenticity throughout all of his works? The cohesiveness alone would be magnificent, and they could get endlessly creative in whatever way they see fit for specific moments to channel back into that quote-unquote manga chaotic aesthetic that's filled with super colorful moments. As usual, expectations will never be met. If you raise them too high, it's just going to come crumbling down. But I think people will enjoy it. I think they'll have fun. I think they'll see a new side of Fujimoto and his work within animation format. I am more than happy with this episode. There wouldn't be anything that I would change, as there's so much talent and passion poured into this project. At the end of the day, it is a love letter from MAPPA to Fujimoto, but to also us as fans of his work. Let me know how you're feeling about it so far.